Hello, everyone. I see some chats here in the chat box. I hope you can hear me. We appreciate you joining us. The topic on today's webinar is browser automation testing with Geb and Grails. Before I pass it over to our presenters, I would like to remind everyone who may be joining just now that you may use the chat box here to ask your questions during the presentation. We will make every effort to address those questions here in the chat. We've got a number of team members, Grails team members here who can help answer those questions as we go. And for those that are not addressed in the chat box, we will be sure to address those at the end of the presentation. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so everyone will receive a recording of this as well as the slides after the presentation. Thanks so much. Sergio?
Thank you, Nikki. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sergio del Amo. I am a member of the Grails OCI team. I am joined by Marcin Erdmann, who is the Geb project lead. Hello, Marcin.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
The goal today is we have put together a Grails application. The Grails is available in a public GitHub repository to show how well Geb and Grails play together. I'm gonna show you just briefly what the app does. So let me go out from Keynote, open my IDE. So this is the Grails application. It's a really simple Grails application. We have several domain classes. It's a Grails application which could be used to manage hotel reservations. We have one room domain class where you will basically save all the rooms in your hotel. Then you have an extra domain class where you will have, you will say things like extra breakfast, I need a crib, I need champagne, all these kind of things. Then you have a booking domain class where you will keep track of the hotel guests. You will keep track of the arrival day, the departure. And then we have two domain classes which create a many-to-many relationship between bookings and extras. I generated the views using the static scaffolding. I have changed it a little bit. Let me start the application and show it to you. So basically, the application allows you to create instances of all these domain classes and create a booking instance, which basically you are able to select different. Let me move this from the view. So I can create, for example, I can create a guided tour of a city. I can create breakfast. And I can create a list of rooms. Let's say my hotel has several rooms. Here in the homepage, I can create booking entries. So let's say I am creating a booking for myself. I am arriving on Friday and leaving on Sunday, coming with my wife. I only need one room and I would like both extras. As you can see, the application is working. One thing that we have done is we have put together tests using Geb. Geb is a browser automation technology, but since we are joined by no other than the Geb project lead, I would like for Marcin to talk us about Geb. Please, Marcin.
Thanks for the first introduction. I will now give you a bit of an introduction about Geb, so that it's easier for you to understand the tests that we've prepared with Sergio for this webinar, and which will be shown to you by Sergio a bit later. So in general, Geb is a browser automation solution. Even though it's usually used for browser testing, it is not a testing framework per se. Geb is a Groovy layer on top of WebDriver, and it uses WebDriver to do all the heavy lifting with regards to controlling the browser. As you might know, WebDriver is a browser control protocol with implementations for various browsers and various languages, and it is a de facto industry standard for driving browsers. So Geb is a layer on top of WebDriver. If something is not available directly in Geb or not a sugar for something is not implemented in Geb, you can always directly get hold of a WebDriver instance and use that should you need to. Geb comes with WebDriver instance management, which means that it will take care of opening the browser at the beginning of your tests, and then closing that browser when your tests are done and your test JVM is shut down. It has a built-in configuration mechanism. It is implemented as a Groovy config script, which you might be familiar with from earlier versions of Grails. And you can configure things like, for example, a base URL of the tested application in that config. Probably the most important part of Geb is the fact that page object pattern is treated as a first-class citizen. And we're going to talk a bit more about page object pattern a bit later and what exactly the support is. But for the time being, I'm just going to say that page object pattern helps you to write maintainable and dry tests thanks to having an established way to encapsulate page content. The next bit about Geb is it comes with a navigator API, which is jQuery-like, not exactly like jQuery, but jQuery-like. And you use the navigator API to select and interact with select DOM elements on the page and interact with them. You use CSS selectors to match certain elements of the page, and you can think of a navigator as a wrapper around DOM elements, similar to what a jQuery object is. The Geb, as I said, is not a testing framework per se. So it is testing framework agnostic. Geb is usually used with Spock, which is a very, very good Groovy testing framework. But there's nothing stopping you to use Geb together with JUnit or TestNG should you wish to. And there is support in Geb for these two other frameworks as well. So a couple of more words about the navigator and its API. So as I said, it's a wraparound DOM elements. The API is jQuery-like. So if you know jQuery JavaScript library, you will be kind of fairly familiar with the concepts and the method names of the Navigator API. Navigators are used, the Navigator API are by means of the $ function is used to find and filter various various elements, DOM elements on the page, and you use Navigator objects to interact with that content. So, for example, set value of on form elements or click button. So you have a very, very basic example on this slide of selecting a submit button and then clicking on it. So let's go back to Geb pages. As I said, Geb pages are mostly about making the test maintainable and readable by applying the principles of modularity, reuse, and encapsulation to the document object model. Pages come with a DSL, which allows you to define page content elements. This way, all the selectors in your test harness are hidden from the test classes themselves and are defined in pages. And also that allows then to use aliases for these elements instead of using selectors, which might sometimes be quite complex and muddle the water when it comes to the test readability.
I have here, Marcin, the example of the create room page. So this is the form where we create a room in the application.
Yes.
We have several elements. Guide me through the elements. So what is the add element first?
So a page, we have, as you said, an example of a page class over here. The important bit is that it extends jep.page class. And we have a couple of static special properties. The first one, as you said, is the add property. The add property allows you to declare a checker which is executed after you navigate to a given page to verify that the browser is actually pointing at that page. So in this case, we are checking that the title is actually create room. And if we navigate to that page and the title isn't create room, we're going to get an error and our test will fail fast. And instead of continuing and trying to find elements on the page, we will know that we have arrived at a different page and not at the page that we expected.
We are not constrained to using just the title to verify that we are in that page, right?
Yes, we are not constrained to only use the title. That's correct. We can use any elements of the page definition. We can use text on the page. We can use pretty much anything that there is on the page. One thing to remember, though, is you should keep these verifications relatively simple because it's just to check that you're on the page. You shouldn't be doing a lot of assertions in there to verify that certain elements are on the page or aren't on the page.
Perfect. Let's move to the URL static definition.
So the URL static property allows you to declare the URL for the page. In Geb, there is a browser class which is basically a wrapper around WebDriver instance. And that browser class has two methods. You can pass your page class to that two methods, and then Geb will navigate to that page if that page declares this static URL property. So in this case, when we say to create room page, we will land at base URL, which in this case is probably localhost 8080/room/create, which is the value of the static URL property.
I think we have an example for a dynamic URL later on. So let's move into the content block.
Okay. The content block allows you to specify elements of the page using the Navigator API. The first one that we have here is the input field. As you can see, the input field definition takes an argument, which is the name of the input field. And if we have content definitions like that, then that content becomes a method of the page. If we move to the next slide, to the save button.
Yeah.
So this save button doesn't take any arguments. So this becomes basically a property of the page class. And then in the save method, slightly to the bottom of the slide, you can see this save button definition being used. So instead of having to every single time use this selector for finding the submit button on this particular page, you can just say save button.click.
That looks great. Let's talk about modules.
Okay, so the second part of the of Geb's support for page object pattern, sorry, are modules, and they are similar to pages in that they also can have content definition blocks. and they are also different from them in that they don't obviously specify URLs or app checkers. Modules can be used also, modules can be used in definitions of page content and definitions of module content. So obviously they can be nested. And modules are very good for reuse of content definitions that exist in multiple pages, or for content that repeats on a single page, like for example, rows in a table. One thing to note is that don't think of modules as only things to be used when you have a repetition of content, either across pages or across a single page. They are also really good mechanism for modeling complex UI elements and hiding that complexity from the test by basically providing methods on a module, which then you can use. So for example, if you have a complex dropdown with autocomplete, you can build a module for that, and then have a single method that allows you to pre-populate the select, the dropdown, wait for it to fetch the options from the server, and then select one of the options.
That's cool.
So
what we are showing is we have a navigation. We are using a nav module. So the nav module extends from jep.module.
That's correct. That's how you define a module in Jep. Yes. As I've said, the navlink content definition in this module allows us to declare a link within the module. And also, because module is a regular class as well, we can have multiple methods in there, like home, rooms, and extras. And what they do is basically they end up clicking on a given link. So again, a way to encapsulate details of how you exactly interact with the content, where it's not important to your test. You just want to know that you just want to go to a certain page without actually dealing with the details that you have to select a given content on a page and then click it.
Let's talk about dynamic URLs. So we hinted before.
Yeah, so we've spoken about navigating to pages before. So you can do that using browser's to method. And Jep goes to the URL that is specified on the static URL property. But Jep also has Jep pages also have a convert to path method that you can override. And if when using the browser's to method, if you pass additional arguments to that method, then these arguments are passed over to convert to path. And the results coming from convert to path is basically appended at the end of the URL. So over here in the slide, we have an example where we pass one as an additional argument to the to method. And we end up with the URL of base URL, which is localhost:8080 /room/edit. That's the value of the static URL property /1, which is coming from the convert to path method.
This is really typical in Grails because we have many times we use path variables. So here we are supplying, this is a typical scaffolding for an edit page where we have this one, which normally is the ID of a domain class. And we are supplying there at the bottom this browser to edit room page, _1. That's the ID of the page where we want to go. Let's move to Geb Spock.
Okay, so I've already mentioned that Jep comes with support for various test frameworks, and I think by far the most popular one used by Jep users is a support for Spock. So the base specifications that ship with that module delegate method calls and property accesses to a browser instance, browser class instance, which, as I said, is Geb's wrapper around WebDriver instance. So these classes, these base classes, these base specifications handle a browser, a life cycle of a browser instance for you. So you can, go straight into navigating to pages and interacting with content.
So we don't need to instantiate the browser. That will be done by those upper classes, right?
Yes, that's correct. There is a bit more method delegation, dynamic method delegation from browser onto page class current page class instance.
Yep.
All that allows you to write a very concise test without the need to explicitly mention browser or page instance, and the calls are being automatically directed to the appropriate object. So one difference between Geb spec and Geb reporting spec is that the reporting spec takes screenshots and HTML dumps of where the browser is at the end of each test. So should your tests fail in CI, then you can, if you are using Geb reporting spec, you can then refer to the reports to see these screenshots to be able to better debug the failures. Okay, so I'm gonna hand you guys, I'm gonna hand you over to Sergio, and he will talk about support for Geb and Grails, and then show you some example tests written for the example application that he introduced in the beginning of the webinar.
Yep. So Grails uses Spock as a test framework, and it uses Geb as the default functional test utility, and it plays really nice together. Basically, the Grails and Geb integration, when you created a Grails application before Grails 3.3.2, that's 3.3.1 and below, when you created a Grails application with the web profile, which is the default profile, you will have all the Geb dependencies included in the application. In Grails 3.3.2, we created a Geb feature, which is included by default in the web profile, and in Grails 3.3.3, which will be released in the upcoming days, we have two features. One feature is named Geb, which will include Geb 1.1.1, which is meant to support Java 7, and if you don't need support for Java 7, I recommend you to use Geb 2, which ships with the latest Geb version. It basically, the Geb plugin is pretty simple. It has a transitive dependency to Geb Spock. Marcin already talked about Geb Spock, and it also ships with a Grails command. So you are able to run a create functional test, and you will get a functional test in the folder source integration dash test. The test will extend the Geb spec and will be annotated with that integration. Also, when you create the application using this source using the Geb 2 profile in Grails 3.3.3, in the upcoming Grails 3.3.3, one of the things that you get included in your build.gradle is the WebDriver binaries Gradle plugin. Can you elaborate, Marcin, what does WebDriver binaries Gradle plugin does?
Yeah, so some of the driver implementations for different browsers, apart from a jar, they also require a binary to function, to be able to drive a browser. Historically, it was only IE and Chrome, but recently also Firefox changed the way things are implemented. So when you want to drive Firefox, you also need a binary. it is quite cumbersome to manage these binaries. So this Gradle plugin allows you to declare which versions of binaries for which drivers you need, which browsers you need. So that's the WebDriver binaries block at the bottom of the slide. And basically, the plugin will download the right version and the right version for the right operating system of these binaries for you, so that you don't have to manually download or install anything, even though these binaries are necessary for the build to run for the browsers to be able to be driven.
So thanks to this Gradle plugin, you basically, if you have Chrome installed or you have Firefox installed, you don't have to configure anything. You don't have to download manually the driver. You just execute the test, and you will see Firefox or Chrome launch immediately, being in automatic mode.
Exactly.
When you download an application with the web profile using the Geb plugin, you get also as test compile and test runtime dependencies, the Selenium dependencies and the Selenium for Chrome and Firefox, and also the previously mentioned Grails Geb plugin, which is the one that has the transitive dependency to Geb Spock. Also, we set up we basically pass the system property of Geb environment. We will discuss more about Geb environments shortly. And also, you pass the environment variable, the system property, to set up the reports directory that will be used by Geb reporting spec to save the screenshots and the HTML dumps in that particular folder. Another thing that you get when you create an application with the web profile and the Geb feature, you get in source integration test resources, you get a file named gebconfig. If you are Grails developers, you are familiar with the concept of environments. In Grails, we have environments. We have the development environment, we have the test environment, we have the production environment. We are able to change between them using -d grails.emp. In Geb, we can do the same thing. We are able to change between different environments using geb.emp. So by default, this Geb configuration file will set up a Chrome driver, a Firefox driver, and a Chrome headless driver. Headless drivers will be particularly useful when you want to run your tests in a continuous integration server. We will talk about that later on. But basically, this file defines the different environments that you can set up. You can set up also here things like different timeouts, and these are another configuration parameters, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. You can set, for example, if you have a fixed base URL for the application that you're testing, you can set it over here as well.
Correct. Another thing that we should all be aware of is how can I run my integration test? Some Geb are functional tests, but they are basically integration tests and functional tests in Grails 3. They are, you can think of them as the same thing. You can run them with the Gradle task integration test. A Gradle feature is that when you have such a long Gradle task name, if it's possible if it doesn't collide with other tasks, you can invoke it with the abbreviation. So for running integration test is quite a nice abbreviation, the IT. Also here I saw in this slide how you can execute the test with different environments. So it's easy to change the environment where you want to run the test. So it's common also for people during their day to run the test in a headless, and if any of the tests fail, you sometimes need to change it to Chrome or to Firefox so that you are able to see what's really happening. I will show you now in the example how to change that. So let me actually show you the test. And we can discuss several things. So tests are here under source integration Groovy. I have several Geb pages and modules and several tests. I'm going to describe a simple test such as the extra CRUD test. So this basically will show you how we have coded the tests so that they are almost not coupled to the markup of the page. So if we need to change the design and we need to change the markup, but the functionality remains the same, we will need to change the markup only in one single place. So here we basically call to. We are able to call to here because we are extending from reporting spec, and through delegation, this is exposing the to method, right, Marcin?
Yeah, so basically what happens here is you are calling the two methods on the browser instance that is managed by the reporting spec.
So the extra list page basically defines this URL. So we are sending the browser to this URL. Then if I go back to the test, I am basically verifying I have this page.table. Table here is a module, which is applying the div content. So this is the jQuery style selector with the $. If you have ever worked with jQuery, this is basically saying, give me the div element with class content and give me the first one in case there are more. And it's selecting the table module. The table module has several methods, basically, which allow me to work with rows. If you remember in the test, we use the number of rows. So basically, we can call if an element in our page is not required, because imagine if you don't have any extras, you probably are not rendering a table. So we can define require false, and if required, if the table is not there, this thing will be empty and we are returning 0 number of rows. And if it's present, we are basically, this applies another row, another module, which basically at the end will return us the number of rows. Let's get back to the test. We are using Spock stepwise, so this test will be executed in order. Here we are adding an extra. We are testing that we are able to add an extra. We are clicking the create button, but as you see, we are not referencing any markup here. So instead, we have created in the extra list pages, we have created a module for buttons. So basically, for the field set with the class buttons, we apply this create module, which has basically defines a content, a new entity button, which is links which text contains the word new. If you remember the application, there was a button row towards the end of the page where there was this new extra button. So we are able to basically capture the element here and call click. So we are clicking the button to create. We are using the add checker here. As Marcin described before, this is the same as when we call the to. This is possible because we are extending from reporting spec. This was basically called the add verifier here in the create extra page. If we are there, if the test succeeded at this point and we are in the create extra page, the test will pass. We will enter the next step. Here we are entering the extra. So I am the same as I showed you before where I type breakfast. I can, this we are leveraging a Groovy feature. So whenever you have a method .setName, even if you don't have a name property, you can define a set name and then you can call name equals. So when I call name equals, I am actually calling this field which calls populate. Populate is a field here in the bottom where basically we supply the input field name and the value. The input field is this element where we used a parameter. So basically what we are saying here when we call input field parentheses and then value, which in our case is name, we are selecting the input field with name name. And we are, another thing that Geb makes really nice is it's really easy to fill a form. So to fill an input text field is as simple as assigning a value to the text property, and that will fill the form. When we click the save button, we want to verify that we are in the show extra page. Again, in the show extra page, we have an add verifier. You will see when I call here page show extra, this is again the same as if I was doing here browser.page. So again, we are leveraging the delegation that the extending from Geb reporting spec or Geb spec provide us. I am checking that the name of the extra that we created is actually the same name as we passed in the test. So if you go here, you will see, again, we are using the get name. This is Groovy, basically. I have here this value, which will go fetch a row with the name and get the property value and call dot text. So do a selection in Geb, you can call dot text, and that will give you the text in that particular elements and the children elements. We are going, the next step is to edit the details of the extra. So I am verifying here that I am able to click the edit button. When I am in the edit page, I am able to fill a new name. I can click update, and I am back in the show extra page. I can check that the name has actually changed, that I am able to select the extra, and that I am able to delete it. So as you see, we are able to create tests that are, in my opinion, really easy to understand and really easy to read, and they are completely uncoupled from the markup behind. So I think that's really powerful. Let me show you the tests running. Let me click in the project for a second. So it's really easy to change the environment if you are using IntelliJ, or if you are using any other IDE, or if you are running the test from the command line. You can change the Geb environment by supplying a system property GebM. So here in my configuration, I have I want to run the test in Firefox. So if I click run integration test, so this is executing the Gradle task. You will see the Firefox browser pop up any moment now. So when you run the integration test, this will start a Grails application in a random port. So Firefox has started, it's being run automatically by the test. I am not doing anything. So as you can see, Geb test and in general functional tests are the tests that allow me to sleep well, basically, because they are testing the UI and they are testing that the application really works as it's intended to work, which is always a nice thing to have. As you saw, the test pass, I have this a little bit of verbose Gradle output. This is because I configured here some Gradle output to get some information for the test. I would recommend for you to, if you are running your test in continuous integration servers, it's really useful to have a more verbose output in the Gradle test tasks, because that way you are able to see what failed in the integration server. Let me go back to the presentation. So there is one question: how come you don't need to specify the version of org.grails.plugins.geb? And that's because that version is defined in the Grails BOM. So the reason for that is the same reason as you don't need to define the versions for all of these plugins. They are defined in a BOM file, which comes for the particular Grails version. So you could override that. So here I'm overriding this one because I wanted to use the latest one. But when you download an application, you will not need to specify the version. I hope I answered the question. So speaking about the Geb and Grails continuous integration, I have here one slide with the Travis setup. Let me show you in the code actually. In the Grails project, we use Travis heavily to build all the projects and run the test as a continuous integration server. So thanks to the plugin that Marcin described, so thanks to this WebDriver binaries plugin, which is doing the heavy lifting of downloading the driver for us, I am able to run the test in Travis just I have this travet.yaml file where I say I want to use the Oracle JDK8 and I want to run this script. And that script is really simple. It basically runs the Gradle check task. I supply the Geb environment, which in my case, I want to run Chrome headless, and that's it. I don't need to do anything else. We have in this repository another branch. So in case you need to run your project without using the WebDriver's binary plugin because you want to support, you want to run with Geb 1.1.1 and support Java 1.7. We have another branch in this repo where we have an example of how to configure Travis to download the Chrome driver and execute it and tell the path. So actually, I may be able to show it to you. Give me 1 second. So here, this is the configuration where you have to download the driver manually. So you will not need to do this if you are using the WebDriver's binary plugin. But if you need to do this, this is actually possible. So you basically install the Chrome driver, and then here in the travis.build, you tell the path where the driver is. So if you need to tell the path explicitly, Chrome has a syntax slightly different from Firefox. If you ever try to run the test without supplying a valid path, it will compare you and tell you to define that. Marcin, can you answer the question in the chat about how to access browser back button in test? I don't think you can, if I'm not mistaken.
There might actually be a back method on the WebDriver instance. There isn't anything directly in Geb, but let me quickly check that. I think on WebDriver, I'll check that a bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically if you on the browser object that you have available in your specification, and if you're using Geb Spock module integration on browser, there is a WebDriver instance. From there, you can get to an object which is called navigate, I believe, and then there should be a back method over there.
Yeah. There is another question in the chat talking about with confirmation. So let's talk a little bit about that. So basically, the idea is, let me run the app. So that's probably easy to see. So before you are able to delete one extra or one room, the browser shows an alert dialog asking you to confirm. So Geb makes this really easy. So if I come here and I say breakfast, and I click here delete, it tells me, are you sure? So if you want to confirm that with Geb, you will wrap this call to page.delete, which actually clicks the delete button with confirm. That will actually click the OK button here. So I don't think there are any more questions in the chat. So there are alternatives. So for example, I am running in a Mac and I don't have the possibility to run my test in Internet Explorer, or I will need to run the test in multiple browsers. So there are other alternatives to headless browsers apart from Chrome headless. So can you talk a little bit about this?
So Chrome headless does not fully support the WebDriver interface yet. So if you're doing if you're trying to test multiple windows, for example, as far as I know, that wouldn't be yet supported with Chrome headless. So sometimes you need alternatives to Chrome headless. It will be awesome when it finally gets fully compatible with WebDriver WebDriver protocol, but it's not there yet. So one of the things that you can do is use either Browser Stack or Sauce Labs. These are two cloud browser providers. So because WebDriver implements this HTTP interface to drive, HTTP protocol to drive the browsers, you can also send WebDriver commands over the internet. And these two companies, Browser Stack and Sauce Labs, if you pay them, they will allow you to access browsers that are running in the cloud and drive them. Geb provides a Gradle plugin, which helps running tests across multiple browsers in Browser Stack and Sauce Labs. And Geb's own harness, where we're testing for actually when we're checking that Geb works with multiple browsers, not just a single one. It uses that plugin. So if you're looking for an example of how to drive multiple cloud browsers, then have a look at Geb core stat module of the Geb project repo on GitHub. Another option when you don't really need to do cross-browser testing and you're happy with just running your tests in Chrome or Firefox, you could, for example, on a CI server, you could use XVFB, which is a virtual frame buffer and basically a headless X11 display server implementation. So if you are using that, you can get a real Firefox or Chrome, not a headless one, configure it to point it to use XVFB as a display, and run that in CI without the need for the CI server to have a real display. If you want to see how you can run tests, Geb tests on CI with XVFB, then in Geb's organizations in Geb's organization on GitHub, there is a project called Geb Example Gradle, and you can see how to configure this, for example, in Gradle in Circle CI.
Perfect. We have a question in the chat asking about what is the support of HTML unit driver in the latest version of Geb. Can you elaborate that?
The support for HTML unit driver is still there. A lot of the tests that are written in Geb itself for the test harness of Geb are using HTML unit drivers. So as far as I understand, as far as I know, there shouldn't be any problems using HTML unit driver. But I would advise to be careful with headless drivers if you are writing real tests for real applications that are using a lot of JavaScript and things like that. HTML unit driver becomes deficient quite quickly, and you're going to save yourself quite a lot of time if you're going to use a real browser instead of HTML unit driver. That is my personal opinion.
Yeah.
There is another question there about driver navigate pack. I don't know if anything changed in WebDriver, but it should work, as you said. The code that you've pasted in that has been pasted into the chat looks all right to me, and this is how it should exactly work.
Getting back to the HTML unit driver, so basically in Grails, in the latest, if you download a version of 3.3.3 with the Geb 2, you will not find the HTML unit driver dependency there. That's done on purpose. As Marcin said, I find the HTML unit driver really, really fragile in the moment you have any JavaScript in your application. And it tends to frustrate people. So I think having there the alternative of running the test with Chrome headless, I think it's a much better alternative if you don't have any problem using that. So that's the reasoning behind removing the dependency from the default Gradle configuration. So we are getting to a close. So I wanted to give a couple of links where people can get more information. Geb, the website of Geb is gebis.org. It's probably one of the open source projects with best documentation. So actually the documentation, it's called the Book of Geb. You can find it. You can find the documentation for the different versions. In Grails, you will use 2.1 in the latest version if you use the Geb 2 profile. Geb has as well a great mailing list where I know Marcin is heavily involved in answering questions. So if you subscribe to mailing list, you will for sure read Marcin's answers to variety of questions. I think Geb is also really mature. I think that's an opinion you probably share, Marcin.
Yeah, Geb has been around for a number of years now. I think it was started by Luke Daly in 2010, and the version 1 has been released, I believe, almost a year and a half ago. Yeah, it is a mature project and maintained as well.
Grails is also a mature technology. Indeed, we celebrated the 10th birthday this month. So using Grails and Geb, you are in solid food. In order to get more information about Grails, visit grails.org. We publish several Grails guides every Monday. For example, today we published a guide to use RabbitMQ and Grails 3. We have several guides which use Geb as well. From the top of my head, we have one about testing security, testing a secure application where you see a Geb test. So right here, you will see that in Grails guides, whenever we have an HTML front end, we usually use Geb test, and I encourage you to use Geb as well. You will see if it makes for solid applications, applications that are tested and that are reliable. If you need any information, we are of course on Twitter. We are of course you can reach us via email. You can find all the documentation for the different Grails components in the documentation page. We do these webinars quite often now. Indeed, we have one this week, I believe, on Thursday. So if you are interested in GraphQL, which is a nice alternative to REST, please subscribe to this free webinar March 9th. If you don't make it for March 9th, I hope to see you in Bridge next week. I think I have everything on my side. We have the sample application in GitHub. So I would like for you to visit the application, give feedback, ask questions, any problems that you face with the application, please tell me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thanks, everyone. So there is one question about quick questions you raised. We are noticing that compared with other apps such as Proactor, it tends to slower. I really don't understand the question. So the question is, I am not familiar with Protractor.
So Protractor seems to be a testing framework for testing Angular JS applications. So if that's sufficient for you, like not every application is an Angular JS application, so not everything can be tested with Protractor. And if that's better performance for you, then you should probably stick with Protractor. I think Jeb and WebDriver gives you more flexibility about what you can test with it. And also the Jeb, I invested quite a lot of time recently in making Jeb faster, and I found a couple of issues that earlier versions had, but they don't have it anymore. So yeah, that's pretty much all I can say to that.
So there is a question about Jeb performance. So I don't know what's. I mean, I personally find that I run my tests with Jeb. Of course, if you Jeb tests in general when you are developing with Grails are slower, but I will not blame Jeb per se. Running functional tests in Grails involves starting the Grails application, so there is a startup cost there. And then I don't see any problems with running tests with Jeb.
Yeah, one thing to remember with testing at such a high level of the testing pyramid as a browser test is you need to stay smart about what you're testing with it and how much of these tests you have and so on. So if it gives you a lot of confidence writing tests, writing browser tests, as you earlier mentioned, Sergio, but there is a certain cost to it. Definitely a unit test will be faster than a browser test. So you just need to be smart about how much these tests you write and what exactly they are verifying.
Yeah, one thing that you can do also is, so whenever you do a Jeb test, if you are like running a Grails application, you often test like, you have like a login page and you have like, you have to put like seed data into the test. So it is possible normally to put all this test data in the application. So for example, here in the sample application, I think for the booking, let me search for the booking. I believe it's the booking test. Let me change the branch 1 second. Yeah, so in the booking test here, I pre-populate the database directly in order to avoid creating all this information using the browser. So as always with tests, how many times do you need to test anything? Only once. It needs to pass, but you only need to test this one. So we have another test which verifies that we are able to create rooms through the UI. So in order to test the booking page, we don't need to create all the rooms manually. So we can basically put the rooms in the database directly, and then at the end of the test, clean the rooms from the page. So the idea is, as Marcin said, use Jeb tests, but try to optimize them. So don't test the same thing twice. So it says, I believe it's possible to access domain objects in a Jeb test. Correct. So
that will be more of a question to you, Sergio, because it has to deal with the integration tests in Grails. It has not much to do with Jeb itself.
So when you start a Grails application and you annotate it with that integration, you basically, when the test starts here, you have an application running. And you are able to, when you talk about domain classes, you can think about domain classes are a representation of the database, basically. So you can create, you can, if you want to access domain classes here directly and manipulate the database directly, you will need to annotate this with add rollback. My recommendation is that you consume services from your test. So here I have services which basically use the GORM data service capability to save rooms. So I am able to use domain classes in my test to populate the database. So that's correct. room and extra domain classes in the test. Let me unmute Nikki. I don't know if we answer everyone's question.
I don't see any further questions coming in through the chat, so thank you everyone for joining the event today. You can visit grailstraining.com to check out all of our upcoming webinars and also our training workshops. They will be made available, and again, this recording will be shared by email as well as the materials that we reviewed here today. It will be sent to your email. And thanks again. Please join us again next time.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Marcin.
Thank you, Sergio. Bye.
Bye-bye.